Ooh, we've got an awkward one today. Are all Filipino workers liars? I'm so uncomfortable to answer this. My name is Pete Moriarty. We help businesses systemize, organize, and scale using Google Workspace and a number of other technology tools. And I have a message here from a friend of mine, which I'm going to read for you and let me know what you think. My boyfriend's looking into creating a business here in the Philippines. He talked to someone in Australia. He made them hesitate. He's a writer and they want to build a business outsourcing company to market to Australians, but for writing. And they spoke to someone and that person said, I quote, he says he has never been ripped off and lied to as many times as any country than in the Philippines. What are my thoughts on this? And there's a lot to unpack here. So let me try and start. First of all, we run a large team in the Philippines. We're an Australian-based business. We've been working in the Philippines for right on about 10 years now, and we have a very successful international company. We have a team that I've met, that I've spent time with, that I've spent years cultivating relationships with, and I would like to say, yes, amongst the challenges of building an international team, outsourcing to different countries along the way, we've made this work. We've made this pretty successful, and we've been able to build a really successful business utilizing professional resources from the Philippines. So full stop, it is possible for remote work to work. We are in this situation and this time in our lives where globally, labor is being democratized. And we are seeing not only large companies being able to take advantage of outsourcing to resources in developing economies, but now small businesses as well. And there are marketplaces all over the world for this. You have freelancer.com, you have Upwork, and you even have dedicated job sites like our favorite onlinejobs.ph, which allows you to hire remote work-seeking employees directly. There's also the rest of the industry in between. There's the professional virtual assistants. You've got virtual assistant agencies who will match you up with someone who's a virtual assistant. And if you're a mid-size or a growing company, you may be looking at someone like a formal BPO or business process outsourcing company to help you with your resourcing. Now, with this comes the challenges of doing international business and working across different cultures and working with different economies. And I'm not surprised that some Australian business owners may have challenges working with offshore remote employees. For starters, we've got a lot of cultural differences that need to be managed when working with someone who's offshore and overseas and remote and who you may not have met in person. And so it's a inhuman experience. There's all these factors that are a part of it. But there's something very particular about Australians that have challenges with Filipino-based workers. And what one of those challenges are is that many years ago, one of the largest telecommunications companies in Australia, Telstra, had a number of call centers based in the Philippines. Now, they still do, they're still there, but a lot of their call centers in the early days in the Philippines didn't have a great customer service experience for Australian-based customers. Whether the connection was bad or the staff weren't trained properly or their language or accents meant that someone on the phone was difficult to understand, Telstra got a really bad reputation for outsourcing their workforce. And, with that came the judgments and the projections of you're taking jobs away from Australians and this is hurting our economy. And also I'm getting poor experiences from Filipino people. And that went from criticism of a business to criticism of a race and culture of people, which is, obviously not quite capturing all of the nuance of the situation. The responsibility for Telstra being a business outsourcing to a different country was that there would be a level of customer service delivered to Australian businesses, which was at the time just not delivered. And, I can understand the challenges with the different cultures. You have a Filipino culture, which is very, very helpful and wanting to be supportive and wanting to solve problems for customers. That's part of the Filipino culture. And you have an Australian culture, which is strong and direct, and we like to curse. And you can see how those two cultures had a little bit of clash in that situation. You had Australian business owners who were tired, who were stressed out, who were trying to work out their phone bill, which is a difficult thing to do in itself. And they were met with someone who didn't understand Australian culture, potentially wasn't really clear in the way that they were speaking, and potentially hadn't been trained well enough to support the products that they were trying to help with. And so we ended up with this big clash. Now, fast forward many years, and many Australian business owners still have a bad taste in their mouth about companies who outsource to the Philippines. And so when us as a small business a decade ago started to build our Philippines-based team, we received a lot of kickback and pushback. where our older demographic of business owners who needed help with their technology tools would say to us, "Oh, I don't really want to work with you if you're outsourcing to another country." And the challenge that we had there was that we had to design our business and our service offering to be so compelling and so useful and such a great experience that we could work through that barrier of our customers complaining to us that they didn't want to work with an offshore international team. So that probably sets a bit of the groundwork for where Australian business owners are coming from. They've had a bad experience with international teams in the past, and now for some of them, they just kind of said, no, I don't want to work with any businesses that are working remotely. But the reality is that the landscape has changed. Nowadays, you cannot compete if you are not looking at some kind of international resources to add to your labor pool, because the savvy and the smart business owners, and here I'm talking about the Gen X business owners and even millennial business owners, see this as normal. Young people like myself have traveled the world and backpacked, especially around Southeast Asia if you're someone who's from Australia, and it's just normal to consider hiring international team members. Everyone here who has read The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, who's popularized having a VA who can help you out with your home tasks, but also your business tasks, has meant that it's becoming part of the business cultural norm to hire international team members. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone's doing a good job of it, and it doesn't mean that things are delivered well. But we're in this time where the labor markets are changing, and many Australian businesses have now come to the realization that, you know what, if I don't actually consider international resources, I'm not going to be able to compete on a global scale. And so most small businesses in Australia are now at least considering their options with remote staffing, whether it's directly or indirectly. And when I say indirectly, it may be that they hire a web development business that has Australian-based project managers or Australian-based salespeople and an offshore development team. And it's not necessarily limited to the Philippines. They could be utilizing resources from all over the world. And we have countless examples of customers that we've worked with that are making use of this strategy. I have one of my close personal friends who's a chiropractor who actually has his x-rays reviewed overseas by someone else remotely and then sent back to him overnight. One of my previous colleagues who has a video editing business will shoot all day long, upload the files into Google Drive, and resources based in Ukraine will actually edit those files and place them back into Google Drive overnight so they're ready for her the next day to deliver drafts to clients. Businesses are literally changing the way that they work. And for many small business owners in Australia, even if they're not directly hiring remote resources, they may be indirectly hiring them, whether they know it or not. So what has emerged is not only this business process outsourcing industry, which has always been there for the big end of town, but for small business owners, they now have access to virtual assistants. And, if you're working through an agency where they're recruiting for you, you're probably going to get a pretty good advantage and, more consistent staff with that route. But for those who are trying to hire directly, there are some stumbling blocks. And that's why for most business owners just getting started on building your international team, I actually recommend working with an agency for your first 1, 2, or 3 employees so you can get used to how the lay of the land is actually going to work. But for those that hire directly, there is unfortunately a culture of things sometimes not working out. Virtual assistants will often, because they're contractors and freelancers technically, be working multiple jobs for multiple employers. And so that may be a way of someone earning extra money because they're looking to stack up as much as possible the amount of hours that they're looking to work. But unfortunately, there's also a culture of some people not quite reporting all of the hours that they've actually worked correctly. And so maybe they're over-reporting the hours that it took to actually deliver on a job so they can actually get more reward from the business owner that they're engaged with. Unfortunately, because of the cultural differences, because of work differences, and because of business owners who are just not really set up to lead a remote team or lead remote staff properly, probably due to their own challenges in leadership skills or just their preparedness for being able to run a remote international company, we will sometimes see that business owners will let go of or dismiss their virtual assistant or their international contractors without much warning. And if you imagine if you're a virtual assistant on the other side of that and getting fired without any warning and you don't have much job security, well, you're probably going to want to hold down 2 or 3 different contracts simultaneously so that if one of them does disappear on you, you've still got food to eat for this week. Now, the challenge is that if you're on the virtual assistant side of the equation and you have clients who are dropping you without any notice, when you have people who are, potentially treating you rudely because they're not setting up an environment that's great to work with, if your client is not necessarily skilled at delegating and delivering work and using technology tools for you to be able to communicate, or is so busy with their business in Australia that they don't actually give the time and attention to manage a virtual assistant properly, well, you can see why there may be a little bit of, apprehension on the other side of the equation for working with Australian businesses. And so we're in this situation right now where people are trying to work out working together, but both sides of the fence have been kind of throwing rocks at each other when things haven't worked out. So what's the solution here? Well, number one is, if you are like my friend and you're a Philippines-based business and you're looking to market to Australian clients, understand that you're probably going to have to spend some time educating them on how to actually work together effectively. If you're an Australian or an international-based business and you're looking to hire or build a team in the Philippines, well, dig around our channel and watch some of the other videos that we have on building remote teams, which will give you some tips on how to do that. We also have some masterclass videos available inside our Genius Academy, which can be accessed via the links below. And you can actually get free access to Genius Academy if you join our free concierge plan. But finally, I want to address something important that my friend wrote in the message here, and that's that they're thinking of starting a writing business. To be honest, that's probably not the kind of business that I would start with out of the gate. You are going to have nuances in communication and nuances in language that can be, pretty challenging to have outsourced to a different market unless somebody in your international team has got deep market knowledge of Australian businesses, Australian consumers, Australian culture, Australian language. And it's different to Americanized English. It's very different to Americanized English. The slang, the way we speak, and the way that we communicate in both written word, but also in spoken word as well, is different. So writing is probably not the business that I'd start with because that's going to be a challenging business to work with. However, there's plenty of other businesses that would make a lot of sense. Something like web development, web design, administration, something requiring a lot of repeatable processes that can be scaled up with the team that are given clear instructions. Philippines-based workers are excellent at building out repeatable processes that can be scaled up because there is a culture of service, there is a culture of following the instructions and actually respecting the authority and respecting the hierarchy of organizations, because many organizations in the Philippines have tens of thousands of employees. It's actually very different to Australia in that Australia has a collection of very small businesses and micro businesses, and 98% of the businesses in Australia have less than 20 employees. Many businesses in the Philippines are either very micro and very small, like 1 or 2 or 3 people, and it's typically a family business, or you have these kind of large, massive organizations with tens of thousands of employees, and there's not actually all that much sitting in the middle there. They do exist, but there's not that much sitting in the middle. And so my recommendation would be is to potentially look at a different industry that's probably not writing for this particular person who asked the question, but for everyone involved to really do your best to learn about who you're working with, build the human relationship as much as possible before you start throwing rocks about somebody being not a great worker or a ripoff based on their identity or based on what their race or their culture is. And of course, on the other side of the field, we have Philippines-based workers who are looking to promote themselves to international audience. Well, how can we find a way to make sure that we build better relationships and so no business owners end up in the situation where they're terminating agreements without much notice or people are being treated unfairly? This is obviously a nuanced topic, and we have all the intricacies of different economic realities and power dynamics that come into play here. I look forward to exploring more of these on the channel. If you've got any questions or you've got thoughts, I'd love to know what you think. Right down below this video in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. If you've got thoughts or comments, I'd love to know what you think. Drop them down in the comments right below this video, and I'll get to as many of those as I can. Cheers.